I guess switching gears a little bit and more on the financialization topic. And I think this is going to go to a Twitter thread you had the other day where you had mentioned with the rise of L2 plus just-in-time liquidity plus RFQ, traditional version 2 style LPs are losing out in capturing volume and thus fees. Do you see any sort of liquidity pools springing up around gaming titles with the idea of folks saying, hey, we know it's going to take this number of hours for folks to get through the title. If they're paying to get into World to then have this play to earn concept going on in the background, is this a mechanism to potentially lock up liquidity on the upfront in a certain amount of time so that you can kind of plan for, I think, what you're trying to say in your tweet? Or have I misread that completely in terms of where you were going with just-in-time liquidity and your thought there?
Oh, I think that there might have been a bit of miscommunication. So for people who might be unaware, just-in-time liquidity refers to rather like complicated technical, I guess, like maneuver might be a way to describe it, where if you see that there is a large buy or sell order happening on a decentralized exchange. In this case, we're talking about Uniswap v3 particularly. You can, add your money to the pool such that the trade is essentially filled all by your funds, and then you take like a large amount of trading fees. So this means that people who are just sort of passively providing like token A and token B to allow for swaps in the pool are going to be missing out on fees. Right, like you added your money sort of just in time for the swap to happen, and then you take it out. So this is sort of like this sort of strategic maneuver that you can do if you're able to like monitor transactions and privately work with things like flash bots. So I think it's still like pretty theoretical. People don't do this often, but the bigger point was just that as we move to an L2 world where transactions can happen faster, it seems like the playing field changes a bit. And you have to be more technical to like continue to make money.
Interesting. You don't see that slowing down at all, I take it?
Yeah, I imagine that the barrier to entry probably just gets higher. So that was the main question of the thread of is there a way that you can better democratize these like market making processes when the requirements to becoming profitable become higher. So less about gaming.
ZK-EVM has been referred to by others as a game changer. Can you kind of describe what you think it will mean for the space in terms of kind of how far off we are from being able to interact with something like that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm really excited about this topic. So I think that when people talk about ZK-EVM, they're usually talking about the work done by ZK Sync, which is one of a few contenders in the ZK rollup space. I'm a big fan of them. I think that they're going to do very well personally. But by ZK-EVM, the idea is that on Ethereum, we have this virtual machine that all of our code compiles into that actually does all the updates for like keeping track of balances, etc. And the idea is in order to use a lot of the scalability provided by like zero knowledge technology, you need to have a way of translating all of this EVM operation into this new sort of zero knowledge paradigm. So under the hood, it works very differently. But the idea is that as a developer, you should now be able to take basically the same code that you wrote to deploy on Ethereum and now have it run on ZK Sync for like a fraction of the cost, which as a developer is really exciting because this means you don't have to necessarily learn a new language or work with any other intricacies. And that's why it's a game changer.
Do you see that as something that's going to potentially stop some of what we hear about these Ethereum killers, like say Solana or Tezos or any of these other chains, where somebody would have to pick up something like Rust or another language? That if this becomes universal, it really removes the reason for having to have any of these other areas that these side chains are solving as Ethereum matures?
So that's a bit more of a complicated question. I think even as someone, I think even as someone like myself who builds, works, and directly interacts with Ethereum, I think the reality of the situation is that a lot of people are being onboarded to other chains like Solana today, and because the transaction fees are so much lower, right? They might not necessarily be incentivized to move back. So I think the sort of real challenge is like everybody is scrambling to onboard new users to their platform, where I think maybe convincing existing people to switch might be a bit harder. Like I think for Ethereum maximalists, right, might be very excited to move over to like a ZK rollup that continues to use Ethereum as the base layer. And it might be possible for people who are used to Solana, but I think that when I'm thinking about this, I'm forward-looking and being excited, like, oh, I see that new fiat on ramps are allowing people to move directly onto layer twos as the way to go.
Agreed. I'm excited to see how everything matures here and pulls out into the space. I guess here, as it's rumored, that GameStop's going to be going with Loopring's L2 ZK solution. Can you, I guess, kind of walk us through when you were getting ready to launch the ZK Sync, L2 solution? What were, the big points that you guys were, going through your checklist wise before you're ready to go to prime time? Because I see now that that's launched, you're able to interact with it with NFTs. Was there something that you guys were anticipating that was going to be an issue that you had to work around, or is there anything that you could share with us from that we might be able to glean as we speculate and wait for GameStop solution?
Yeah. So I'll say that in my mind, there's sort of two big players when it comes to ZK rollups and scaling, and that's sort of ZK Sync and Starknet. There are also other things, so apologies in advance if I didn't mention your favorite research or development effort. But earlier this year, when I was figuring out what thing to hack on, Starknet still wasn't live, and ZK Sync only had token transfers. So there wasn't really a lot of choice. Loopring, for the record, is for very specialized AMM operations. So again, at this point in time, there was nothing that had like fully general computation on a ZK rollup. But it was exciting to hear that ZK Sync was planning on adding NFTs. So I was able to reach out with the team, learn more about their upcoming API documentation. So really the end choice just sort of boiled down to, I liked working with NFTs, and this was the only thing that was coming before everything else, basically.
No, that's fascinating. I guess I want to start switching gears a little bit here because I realize we're getting closer to almost 45 minutes in here, and I want to run over too long on our time here, and we've still got at least another third to go. So I'd like to start moving over, more towards some of our artistic questions. And for the first one here, I think I'd like to throw this one to Karam/Luma. How have limitations/features of different blockchains and/or platforms influenced your work?
I've only worked with Ethereum. We're always talking about Ethereum fees, but that's what limited me from minting artwork in the beginning. Maybe that's a good thing because you can only mint the best art that you have. The OpenSea shared contract is a pretty good alternative, but it devalues your work immensely. Creating a 10,000 collection like HD Punks was perfect because I didn't have to pay the minting fee myself for each HD Punk. It was included in the mint price thanks to the smart contract. Deploying a smart contract, however, is pretty expensive though.
Interesting. Owen, can you elaborate to why deploying a smart contract can get expensive like that? Maybe at a 10,000-foot view for us.
Oh yeah. Before that, I just have a bit of a personal vendetta with the OpenSea contract in that it's not verified. I think this is like very harmful for builders, especially because like I think the contract's been out for like a year and there's no source code to it. You can't interact with it on Etherscan. So if you're an OpenSea user, please demand that they verify the contract. It's been frustrating for lots of builders. So just wanted to
Can you
spread
point
that.
us something to that? Because I would love to help direct our audience's attention towards that, because that is kind of scary.
Yeah. And there've been like accusations that the contract is upgradable, and I think they did in fact change the logic at some point. But again, there's no way to verify this because they haven't shared the source. probably the best way would just be to go to like feedback on the OpenSea site, where I think there's a forum, and politely request that they do so. But
That's good to know. Thank you.
Back to the topic at hand about deploying. So deploying is expensive because you are adding new data to the Ethereum blockchain, and that is like going to be accessible for sort of the rest of the blockchain's existence. There's a big caveat there, but like broadly speaking, that's the reason why. Whereas if you're making a transaction, it's more ephemeral in the sense that like, okay, it's stored once in the logs and then some state update gets changed. But for an NFT contract, you have to store a lot of information that refers to how the logic is being kept track of, and like what happens when there's a transfer, things like that.
Gotcha. So everything has to be accounted for in that contract. It's not like you can go back after it and try to account for a new use case. That's something that has to be all thought of when you're creating the piece at the time, correct?
Yeah.
Owen, why did you start working with Ethereum and NFTs?
So I first heard about Ethereum in 2017, actually. So that was sort of when it, I think, hit mainstream news for the first time. And my friend invited me to do some hackathons with them. And I sort of just had that like the back of my head for a while. But it wasn't until last year when DeFi Summer happened, and I started getting into a lot of the various yield farming protocols that had popped up. And I'm a developer, so I wanted to build something, but I thought, okay, well, I'm hearing about these hacks that happen with DeFi projects. Maybe I should do something simpler. And NFTs were much less in vogue at that time. So I just tinkered with a few projects and entered some of them into hackathons, and they eventually iterated and became the 0x Mods project. And then, with like the mini sort of NFT bull run that happened in spring, I was like, oh, I suddenly have domain knowledge that's really relevant. I should keep hacking on this. And I just kept building.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Karam, why did you start working with Ethereum and NFTs?
The NFT technology was fascinating to me, and it immediately clicked. Digital ownership was always something I worked with Counter-Strike Go skins as an example. NFTs were the next logical step. I only work with Ethereum because I don't trust other chains. Look at what happened with Tezos, for example. Their marketplace exploded.
Do you agree with that, Owen? That ultimately Ethereum is proving out that you've got that triangle to choose from. You can choose decentralization, you can choose cheapness, and you can choose speed. And that ultimately, yes, the decentralization is going to lead to more expensive costs as Ethereum is scaled, but that ultimately it's proving out to be that gold standard for the space here.
Another, I think, big question. So the reason, I think that there's a strong argument for Ethereum if you buy it, which is, if you believe in rollups being the way to go. So, if you want to have, extensibility or scalability beyond your base chain, you're going to be relying on rollups. And the idea is that this is probably more efficient than having your base chain do everything. So in that sense, I think Ethereum has done the most work towards making itself amenable for these purposes with regards to keeping the base layer sort of lighter, trying to do less, and then offloading in the end game, more of the users and activity to these upcoming rollups. Whereas if you look at other L1 chains, this might not have been a focus for them at the start, right? Not saying that they can't pivot to doing something like that, but if you are bullish on rollup technology in general, I think Ethereum is probably like the best contender to be the place where rollups settle on, at least for the near future.
And I know you kind of answered before that you just kind of started hacking and you just ended up where you are. I've got that Danny DeVito meme in my head where I just started blasting and now I'm here. But before you ended up where we are here, were there any other blockchains or platforms prior to committing to ETH that you even really kind of thought about or entertained, or was it your interest kind of set you down this path and you were funneled to ETH and that's where you are now?
Yeah, I was definitely very influenced by, the people around me and the hackathons that I went to, which were the Ethereum ones. So back in 2017, I think, a lot of the possible contenders like I don't know, EOS or IOTA aren't really with us today in like a super meaningful form. So I think I was definitely influenced by then, and then a lot of the more exciting, faster stuff to some people sort of cropped up in the meantime when I wasn't paying as much attention. So when I came back to the space, Ethereum was still top of mind. After I dove into NFTs more, though, I did start looking into other places for like file storage in particular. So I think Arweave is also something that I've been trying to pay more attention to as like a file storage layer that is ideally having better data permanence guarantees compared to something just like IPFS.
You just answering where I was going with that. Is that a competitor to IPFS, or is that something to supplement that at that level of the stack, or is it just doing something different but unique at the same time that IPFS just can't handle right now?
Yeah, I think the main selling point for people choosing Arweave is that supposedly the network costs and some assumptions about how the cost of storage will go down is you pay once and then your data is supposedly accessible on the network for essentially as long as you need it to be, right? They claim like 200 years or something like that, whereas IPFS has no persistence guarantees. It's just sort of like a base layer for file sharing, content discovery, and then you have to build things like Filecoin on top of that, which then try to incentivize the storage of the data. So for people like me who might just want to pay once and then have the data accessible, if I'm doing an NFT collection, Arweave is more attractive.
I think that makes sense with what you're saying, but the NFT being non-fungible in nature. Once it's set, it's set. It's not like you're trying to go back and mess with any of the data. So you could set it and forget it in a sense. That's a win for you as a developer.
Yeah, at least for projects where that sort of permanence is important. Right? There are also really exciting projects that try to do something more dynamic, and then the metadata might change, but in those cases, Arweave isn't the right fit.
Gotcha. Karam, did you research any other blockchains or platforms prior to committing to Ethereum? And if so, what were some of the pros and cons that shaped your decision?
I didn't research any other platforms because ETH was already too big at the time. There wasn't really a point to restrict my outreach by going to other blockchains with no user base and no historical significance.
Huh. Yeah, that seems to line up with what Owen was talking about with some of those chains that are no longer with us from his first hackathons. So it does seem to be that Ethereum is standing the test of time as we've gone on from 2017 to now. So interesting to watch as we go here. Karam, what are some key opportunities of existing platforms that you'd like to see improved in a new platform, and which key features should be preserved?
Probably making them more accessible to normal people. Buying and selling NFTs should be much easier so that more people can get into it. We're still really early in this space.
Oh, and do you agree with that? That at this point, it's kind of on the marketplaces to make it easier to onboard users. 'Cause I know one of my biggest gripes with OpenSea, outside of the vendetta that you've just raised for me to be now more personally aware of, is that just trying to communicate with a user that has an NFT listed, it just seems darn near impossible. Like, are there features now that you think that without what OpenSea did, we wouldn't be where we are today? I mean, I imagine we need them to be progress-wise for the industry to be where it is today. But feature-wise, is there something missing there that you think could be captured somewhere else that would just make it that much easier for you as either a creator or a connoisseur of NFTs?
Yeah, I think probably the first thing to preface with is I think that it would be sort of disingenuous for people who work on Ethereum to not acknowledge that fees from a dollar perspective are pretty high right now. So I think there's a whole slew of sort of art that might be priced more reasonably for NFTs that you simply can't do on Ethereum. And we're still sort of in a transitory phase where we do have things like you can trade NFTs, buy, sell them on ZK Sync's ZK rollup now. It's on mainnet, so you can do that. But OpenSea doesn't support that, and the ZK NFT product that I built is just sort of a proof of concept. It's not that performant. So I think that there's sort of two things. One is making it just easier for people to use, and that includes things that you say like maybe being able to message users, being able to pay directly with your credit card, making it more clear like where the items are. And I think the other thing is just improving the actual like cost ease of use, where if you're buying on mainnet right now, prices are still high, and ideally you want to see marketplaces integrate some of the like ZK rollup stuff that's live, but also acknowledging that it's not all there yet, right? Like you can't do all the complex like royalty stuff on ZK Sync's mainnet, at least not without like some hacks in the development environment that we have today.
Interesting. And timeline wise, how long do you see that this kind of playing out here? Are we talking, months or 24 months, or is this like, I know in a sports analogy, they like to say they're 2 years or being 2 years away. We're not, perpetually stuck where this is something that's hanging out there. This is something that you believe the community is actively working towards?
Oh, definitely, for sure, right? I mean, you look at some of the recent updates from like Starkware and ZK Sync. It's insane how fast they've been beating original estimates for when we thought we'd have ZK rollup stuff. And now with both Immutable X and ZK Sync mainnet, there are ways to trade NFTs at very low costs already. But for more full programmability, I think that's probably like we'll probably start seeing some fully fledged out test nets and maybe really early things like maybe 3 months out is optimistically where I'd like to be able to start tinkering around.
Sweet. What do you think are some of the hardest things to learn when you are starting out in this space? What would have made it easier?
So I'll only again be able to speak for developing on Ethereum, and I think there might be some things that might be more specific, for Rust or Solana. So we'll be able to speak to those. I think that if you're planning on writing smart contracts, there's this great book called Mastering Ethereum. You can find it for free on GitHub. That goes over lots of annotated code. I think it took me a while to find the right people to follow on Twitter, like a mix of developers and projects that I liked. So I think that, curation would be good. My friend Scott has this fabulous notion about getting started in Web3, whether you're like building or developing. And I'll try to see if I can send that link to you later. And that's really great. It goes over a lot of the different documentation, tools, builders to follow, things like that.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, I'll try to get that after the chat.
I appreciate that. Karam, same question to you. What do you think are some of the hardest things to learn when you're first starting out? And what would have made it easier for you getting started in this space?
Dealing with gas prices is really unnerving. It doesn't really make sense when you're starting out. You need to track it to pick the best time to mint your NFT. I probably should have watched more educational videos about Ethereum in the beginning too.
I agree. We should probably all read the instructions before diving in. But personally, for me, I felt like I finally got my feet put to the fire that first time I screwed a transaction up and lost some gas because I messed with a gas limit or let my transaction hang because gas was way higher than what I thought it was. Those are some fun learning lessons, right? The best ones are the ones that are expensive in some way, shape, or form. Awesome. I want to shift gears a little bit more towards the financialization of NFTs here. Can you see platforms coming online, with their marketplace using potential airdrops to lure folks, to pay the freight, of gas costs to get on their L2 environment?
Yeah, I definitely think that.
I guess what kind of spurs the question is folks have seen the ENS drop happen and tokens come, and the idea of participating in the environment, is there some way that you could then be rewarded for paying the gas to get there?
Yeah, absolutely. It was about, I think, a year ago or so, maybe a little bit less, that Rarible, they were doing like weekly token airdrops for their users. And they saw like a big spike in activity during that. And, we set aside quite a large amount of NFTX tokens for farming and for like givebacks to users, and we've never actually done that yet. And personally, I think it's an incentive to attract people, but it's not a long-term strategy to keeping users, right? It's just like giving someone 50% off on their meal or something at McDonald's. Like you can't make money doing that in the long term, but it's great for letting people know, hey, there's a new McDonald's in town, and getting people to take that first step to visit it. So I think NFTX, we're kind of getting close to approaching that point where we do want to start, really going into growth mode and attracting users. And last year there was this whole excitement around farming, and it was basically, the more money you put on the platform, the more rewards you get. And I think it's more likely what we'll do is, instead of saying, it depends on how much money you have, we'll just say it depends on how much you use our platform. And basically, what I would like to do is basically what you were suggesting, and that's like paying people back for the gas that they spend. And then the nice thing about doing that is that it's not really possible to game, because you have to spend at least as much as you get back, but it's still pretty nice for users to get that that weekly airdrop or whatever that makes up for whatever gas they may have spent on the platform. And I think that will definitely, airdrops in general, and incentives will be huge for L2s and attracting new users. um, I should add though, because I know that Owen, when he was asked this, that he mentioned that he wasn't that bullish on the airdrops. And I should mention that I think things are very different in Web3 than they are in Web2. In Web2, there's very much like this mad rush to be first. And then once you manage to be kind of the biggest incumbent, then you basically have a monopoly. And you can look at stuff like Facebook or Instagram, Snapchat. It's like they're basically impossible to compete with. And so it's kind of like this sprint. And Web3 isn't as much like that. And the reason is because all the data is open, and everything's composable and everything's forkable. So you don't get these monopolies that form as much. I think a lot of Web3 projects, and specifically NFT projects, make the mistake of taking a Web2 approach and this mad rush, attract users, and then basically kind of lock them in, like this walled garden approach. And that it doesn't really work in Web3. Long term, the platforms which give users the most freedom, and let people come and go as they please without having punishing them as they exit, those are the type of platforms that I do think will succeed the most. So I know Owen mentioned, you can put an NFT for sale on multiple different marketplaces, so it doesn't really make sense for one marketplace to pay people too much. And I do get that side of it, but I also think that there is something to be said for just these short bursts of givebacks or giveaways that attract users, and kind of like a promotional, like a 1 month promotion, and then you kind of ease off of it and you go back to the regular Web3 building.
Gotcha. And I think you already kind of started to answer my follow-up question to this, is if this airdrop approach takes hold, how does the market mechanics change in terms of how everything had played out before? Because you talked about how systems could be gamed now. You kind of remove that incentive where somebody has to spend the gas to then get any sort of rebate. I'm just trying to think on the fly here, how would somebody game that in a bad way unless they go and buy the floor of a whole bunch of NFTs? But then again, that's going to benefit the community as a whole, because somebody's going to then have to pay to send those over to get said rebate. So I like how your approach is trying to align interest here, as opposed to I guess trying to leave somebody that first in the door and then you shut it behind you and nobody else gets theirs kind of thing. I think that approach is definitely way more empowering, and I think probably what you're going to see is a winning formula moving forward, that those that can empower creators and empower users to use their platform and not necessarily lock them in a walled garden approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And the gaming of these incentive mechanisms, I think that's inevitable. I think the term for that sort of situation is like a red queen race, which is like you're running in the spot but never actually getting anywhere. And basically, teams will have to keep on coming up with novel ways of doing airdrops that aren't gamed, and then these bots will figure out ways to game them, so they'll have to come up with another new way. And that basically stems from the fact that people can be anonymous in Web3, and there's no way to really have a Sybil resistant identity system, at least not yet. So yeah, that's part of the fun.
Cool. No, and I think this kind of dabbles into where we want to go next with the financialization here, and I think this is right up NFTs' alley, which is, used games are, I think, a big part of what we think on the GME side here are going to be, potential avenue for GameStop to explore with NFT.GameStop.com. If that becomes a thing, I would have to imagine that the liquidity pools would be available for those NFTs just like any others. That even if it's not a straightforward process with GameStop's marketplace, there would be a secondary marketplace regardless for used games, which would be NFTs if the industry goes this route.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should, just for listeners, kind of briefly go over NFTX. Our original use case was bundling NFTs into like index funds or tokens so that people could get exposure to like a set of NFTs. But then over the last year, we've kind of pivoted our focus, although that's still very much a use case. Our main focus now is leveraging these index funds or tokens in a way to pool liquidity. And basically what ends up happening is that it enables whales and big holders to kind of just go and dump their NFTs and some ETH into a pool and just earn fees as there's turnover and people buy and sell. And this is great for NFT whales, because as it is right now, earning money through turnover, it's a very work intensive process. You have to put your NFTs for sale and watch the prices and update the prices, and then when they sell, you buy more cheap NFTs, and you're providing this liquidity, and you're basically a market maker. So then NFTX kind of automates that, so that people that so let's say you have like 100 copies of some used game, you can just put that into a vault, and then as people buy and sell that used game, you earn a small fee every time. And it just, it simplifies your life as a market maker. And yeah, I definitely think that's a big use case in the future for NFTs. Reselling is such a great use case. And like NFTs, they can even be used for subscriptions. So like imagine, someone gets like a Netflix subscription, and then 6 months they don't want it. It's like, well, you can sell it, right? And I think used games, same deal. It's like, once you're done with that game, why not sell it? And since it's totally digital, then there's no damage to the product.
But you are able at that point to decouple any NFTs that you may have earned in the game or experienced from that game and pull from you and hold into your profile, because that again would probably be stored on whatever player profile you're using. That then would count as credit or whatnot of, hey, I completed this game, or I have these NFTs from this game, even though I then turned it into a used game on the marketplace thereafter.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. It's like, selling your car, but keeping the photographs of you driving around in it. Yeah, so no, I definitely think that that'll be pretty common. And kind of on that note, like we do have a bit of a problem, not a problem, but a challenge at the moment that, with these NFTs that are starting to do airdrops of their own, or like staking. So for example, like Supducks, you can stake and you can earn your Volt tokens. Like with Bored Apes, users got an airdrop of like the mutant serums. And one of the problems right now is people that are staking their NFTs in a vault, they're not really able to take advantage of these airdrops. So
does that mean
people
that the
that
vault
had
holds any of those airdrops at that point then? Sorry to cut you off.
yeah, so it's actually quite complicated and nuanced, and it depends on how the airdrop happens. So with some airdrops, how it works is that the airdrop actually gets applied to the NFT specifically. For example, with the Meebit airdrop, every CryptoPunk was eligible to get one free Meebit. So what happened is people rush to be the first to kind of go through the entire vault. And there's like 80 punks, and to just loop through it and try and get all the me bits. And then once all those me bits were claimed, then those punks, there was nothing left. But then in other situations, if the airdrop is designed so it actually goes to the address of the people holding the assets, then our vault does end up eligible to claim a lot of money in assets. So yeah, it gets kind of complicated, and it's been a difficult problem for us to solve, but we do think we're getting closer. And it's really important to a lot of users that they're able to benefit from these airdrops despite staking their liquidity on NFTX.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my follow up to that would be is you guys operate on a DAO, and is my understanding, I guess each vault is its own independent DAO. Would that be something that members that participate in that vault could then vote on? If let's say that they were awarding it to the contract address, and it could be dispersed to folks as either tokens or the actual NFTs themselves, or is that something you guys are going to have to unilaterally make a decision about, and that would apply across the board? And would that be the same approach that other marketplaces would have to consider as well?
Yeah, it's tough, and that's definitely one way we've looked at it, is saying like, okay, what if we basically make vaults like their own DAOs, and then people can vote and say like, hey, let's claim all these me bits or something, and then let's give them back to our holders. The direction we're leaning, though, is to just kind of let the free market decide. And the reason is because it gets very expensive and gas for the DAO to kind of come together and converge on decisions, and then to disperse that to everyone. So the way we think we're going to do it is we'll basically let people bid for the ability to run some arbitrary code from the vault's address. So like, let's say, everyone knows that in 10 minutes, there's going to be some airdrop to Bored Ape holders. Then people could start bidding for the right to claim that entire vault airdrop. And then the winner of that bid, they would basically get all the assets, and then the money from the bid would go directly to the holders. It's not a perfect situation, because some people do actually like getting the specific items, but I do think overall it would be pretty cool. For instance, I was like in London the last week, and I missed out on an airdrop, and I had like a bunch of NFTs from it. And it just kind of gets difficult to keep up with all this stuff. Whereas I would love if I could just stake my NFTs and just forget about it, and know that any airdrops that happen, somebody out there will bid on it, and then I'll end up getting the proceeds for whatever that airdrop was worth. So yeah, there's trade-offs, and it's a difficult problem to solve. Yeah.
No, I like how you guys are trying to approach it as a set it and forget it. Though the making it as easy as possible for the user, I think is certainly the approach to go, because this stuff is already complicated enough as it is.
Exactly, and yeah, gas doesn't make it any easier.